Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inner Loop YouTube channel. I'm Lena, the manager of our Authors Corner series, and today I'll be having a conversation with Laura Robinson about her collection of poetry and Essential Melancholy. For more Laura and more Authors Corner, you can check out our website to find articles, interviews, podcast episodes, and most importantly, a link to purchase the book. So, welcome, Laura. So great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Lena. It's good to be here.
So, where are you right now, physically?
Physically, I'm in my apartment, which I recently found out does not have air conditioning. Yeah, I know, right? Can't wait for summer. But other than that, I'm hanging out with my cats. It's a lovely Sunday. It's sunny. And in my life, I just turned 33. I
Nice.
have, thanks, in my Jesus year. I'm back in school for nursing, and then just like sort of doing career exploration and expanding my hobbies and creative pursuits. So just trying to find joy in all the places that I can. So,
Yeah, that's really exciting that you're back in school for nursing. What does your writing routine look like, kind of as a result,
oh my
if you
gosh.
have one?
Yeah. So I participate in a weekly poetry group with two of my friends, Matt Zambuto and Kira Shuttleworth. So that definitely helps me keep a structure. I thrive under some structure. So I always have, editing to do for that. I have new pieces to write and revise. Other than that, I don't keep a regular practice. I've started writing after I read things. I found that has been really I guess productive in
Mm,
my practice. And then I always walk around with like a little notebook. I take notes on if I hear something that I like, either if it's a word or someone says like a sentence at a bar that I think is interesting, I'll write that down. So my practice is really fluid. And for me, that's the easiest way to keep it. Because it's adaptable, adapts to my life, and it takes the pressure off me to feel like I have to perform. So
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. That's wonderful. It's interesting that you mentioned that kind of fluidity, and sort of accumulation of moments and images and sort of scraps of dialogue, because the book that we're going to be talking about today, An Essential Melancholy, for all of our
Yay.
viewers, it looks like this. There are actually two cover options. I opted
Yes,
for
are.
this one. I just kind of
There's two.
enjoyed the color story. Yeah. Um, Seems, at least to me as a reader, kind of a project book, with sort of an intention behind it. And the first poem in the collection, Forgiveness or Something Like It, sort of explicitly sets out that intention almost, and kind of lets us look at what the speaker is like trying to do. So forgive, and also leave, it's sort of implied an abusive situation, and then erase kind of the horror of that situation and ultimately to heal. So does that resonate with you in terms of kind of your goals behind the writing of the book? And was this poem always the first in the collection?
So I'll start with your last question. It wasn't always the first poem. Well, as soon as I wrote it, as soon as I had the idea for it, I knew that it had to be the first poem. I liked, like you said, it was the intention setting. But as far as the rest of it, healing is not linear. And I liked the duality of like calling it forgiveness, but also saying like, hey, there's a lot of anger in it, and wanting to erase the horror, and then later understanding that erasing something doesn't make it go away, it just makes you forget it and maybe repeat mistakes. Healing was definitely the most important aspect of it for me, which is just it's messy and complicated, and it is really hard to leave that horror behind. But um, in wanting to leave, just like physically leaving the relationship, but also leaving it behind me, so it's no longer affecting myself and my life moving forward. So.
Yeah, you mentioned anger. And I
Mhm.
did really feel in this poem
Yeah.
and many others, but this one I always came back to, that there's this sort of rage simmering beneath this idea of forgiveness, which is a wonderful kind of contrast and almost contradiction, but not quite in the end. And I'm wondering, like, what role does anger play either in your poetics in general or in the writing of these poems?
Sure. So I write as self care, and I write as reconciling either situations or emotions that feel complex or uncomfortable to me. And, especially as a woman, I've always had a very complex relationship with anger. And I think in a grieving process, which a lot of this book is grieving, anger is a really important emotion and part of that. And I made the agreement with myself that when I did this poem or when I did this project, that I wouldn't spare anything. I wouldn't shy away from things that made me or maybe my readers uncomfortable. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that anger kind of gets a bad rap. Anger can be a really useful tool for social justice change, for personal motivation, for deciding that you've had enough and you need to leave a situation. So obviously, it can be very detrimental. But that plays into the larger role, like you said about my writing, is reconciling the things that just make me uncomfortable and figuring out why and understanding how I can maybe channel that in a more positive way, both in my writing and in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's cathartic to read. I don't know if it felt cathartic to write, but it definitely as
Very
a reader
much.
feels, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about anger getting a bad rap, and being so productive. I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it too, that kind of the expulsion of something is also
Yes.
the productivity of something new.
Yeah. And I really like what you said about catharsis, because in a lot of ways, that writing space is a really safe space to express those things that are otherwise like really violent and horrific and awful, in a way that doesn't hurt anybody, and just sort of transforms it into something that can't hurt me or anybody else. Carl
Mm,
Jung theorized that writing had a transformative power because you took things or emotions or experiences that affected you, and through writing you transformed them into its own entity, so it no longer had power over you through that. And I'm glad that that came through, in the cathartic aspect of it. So.
absolutely. Yeah, I want to dig into a little bit of the expression of some of these themes or experiences, and the form and content within the collection. And mythology comes up several times. Various myths are treated in certain poems. Um, and I'm curious sort of why mythology. Does that have personal significance for you or sort of research significance? And what does it help you think through or discover?
Sure. A great question. I've been really like a lifelong atheist. I've never gravitated towards religion. I grew up reading a lot of mythology. It's really interesting to me. It's interesting, to me, how people reconcile with things that they don't necessarily understand. So that's really, sorry, my cat is scratching right now. Um, um, how they try to make sense of the world around them. And that was really the function of mythology. And I grew up reading Greek mythology. I think it's so interesting. And as a female writer, it offers an opportunity to reclaim narratives where women are tools for men's desires or anger. They're the hanged maiden stereotype or the sacrificial lamb. Or, you have badass women like Athena who really are just subjects of internalized misogyny. And, you know, those could be such interesting characters to reclaim. And I enjoy reclamation, in my writing. So that, and I'm just a nerd. I like reading those things. I love all the animal imagery. I love that they also don't, the original writers and the people of a translated sense, don't really spare, like the uglier aspects of it, which really speaks to human nature. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So there are two poems that stand out to me as utilizing mythology quite explicitly, or sort of it becomes almost the frame and spine of the poem. So we have Demeter kills Persephone, and then Siren sings of the hanged maidens. So I was wondering if kind of like one or the other or both. Would you mind just sort of talking us through, I guess, the myth behind the poem, and then how you took inspiration from what exists and sort of broke it, or um, yeah, interacted with the existing story.
Sure. So the myth of Persephone has always been one of my favorites, and lately it's gained traction again in like the modern consciousness. I don't know if you've heard of Lore Olympus. It's this webtoon. It's basically a retelling of the Persephone myth, and that's really how I reconnected with it. But overview of the myth, there are variations to it depending on the translation, but essentially, Persephone is the daughter of Demeter. Um, Persephone's the goddess of spring. She's out one day in the mortal realm just chilling, and she's either kidnapped or falls into a portal that takes her to the underworld, and she gets stuck. And Demeter is really upset by this, and she feels a lot of guilt because she wasn't watching after her daughter. And Hades makes a deal with Demeter, and he says, "Okay, I'll give your daughter back to you as long as she hasn't eaten anything here." And because Persephone had been down there for a long time, she was tempted into eating 6 pomegranate seeds. And when this was discovered, Hades told Demeter, like, okay, well, because she ate six, she's going to spend 6 months down in the underworld with me, and then you can have her back for 6 months. And that explains seasons. So when Demeter or when Persephone returns to her mother, we have spring and summer. And then when she leaves to return to Hades, who is her husband at this point, it's a period of mourning for Demeter. So we have the fall, the death of things, and winter, the covering, and just the freezing. So the myth is always told with Persephone at the center. And I was really interested. I'm not a mother, but how Demeter might have felt through, in the loss of her daughter. And it's not a permanent loss, but I was interested in that loss because in the time period that this project is written about, I suffered a lot of my own loss and grief. For me, it was a really powerful way to reconcile with outside forces had taken something that was meaningful to me away from me. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then for sirens, it's a mix of a bunch of different myths, and all of it at the center is where women are either exploited or killed on the whims or motivations of other people. And again, it's the reclamation, it's the retelling of these things to say like this is how you thought it was, but it's not.
So that's such a powerful feeling and assertion in the context of the collection as a whole. Yeah, you mentioned, and in describing the myth of Demeter and Persephone, I feel like place actually plays such a big role in how, in their emotions, their ways of engaging with the kind of powers at be. And I'm wondering about place in this collection and in sort of your life at the time of these poems. So, um, how is place operating for
Mhm.
you, and how is it sort of anchoring the experiences that you're writing about?
I was moving around a lot when I experienced the things that inform this collection. So my sense of location and being anchored was very much taken away from me. So I think again, it all goes into reclamation was to be able to position and anchor myself in the retelling and feel empowered and feel possessed of my body again.
Mm.
Um, because I had spent so long of being away from my family and moving around and really just feeling lost in a lot of ways. I had always been the person who knew what they were doing, and for the first time in my life, really, I had no idea what the fuck was going on at all. And so yeah, and I've always really connected with nature and water. I am a fire sign, so I like that water sort of balances me. I grew up in Salisbury, which is between the bay and the ocean, so I spent a lot of time by water. Find it very calming. So yeah, again, it goes into that reclamation, and also just construction wise, it's good to have a like an anchoring spot for the poem. As much as I love
Yeah,
dream logic and making it float around, it doesn't always work. So
absolutely. It does kind of provide a wonderful contrast to have, even some of these sort of heavier ideas, and then to be grounded once again in geography, especially when discussing the body and the speaker's relationship with their body or sort of estrangement from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving into a little bit more of a granular sort of perspective on craft, the poems Barrier Zones and Ruby Throat really stuck out to me in terms of their use of point of view. And the you, so they're both second person, but the you seems to be addressing sort of different recipients or subjects, I suppose. And the first, it seems like it's kind of directed at the reader or like a more general you. And in the latter, it seems to kind of be speaking directly to a specific person or almost character, and perhaps the speaker's abuser. So, who did you find yourself writing towards when writing these poems, or sort of the poems that made it into the collection as a whole?
Sure. So second person was important for me because a lot of it I was talking to myself, just working through things. And then as I continued it through the collection, I realized that I was asking my reader to hold up a mirror and say, hey, what of this do I recognize? What of this do I identify with? Um, and for barrier zones, there was a time in my life, and I still sort of feel it. I think a lot of women and femme identifying people feel this way, that our bodies are always on display, and for others' consumption. So it's really that feeling of like having to discuss how I was feeling in my body and why, I had the relationship with it that I did. Ruby Throat, certainly it's addressing the abuser, but also, it was also talking to myself. That poem came out of thinking back to the apartment I used to live in with this person, and the realization after we both moved out that I would never be there again. And it was literally a mental reconstruction of it into like a mausoleum of like boarding everything up and leaving, what was a really horrific time in my life, enclosed and separate from me. Um,
Mm.
and then just generally, empathy plays a important role in this project for me, in that empathy is a secondhand emotion. Not to say it's not important, of course it is, but we can never truly understand somebody else's experiences because we did not experience them ourselves. And so I think empathy being that second person voice of saying, like, what if this was you're experiencing this could be your life. What do you think about that? So that was also just a disembodied thing in it.
I love thinking about the second person as a conduit for empathy. I tend to think about it just sort of in shorthand as almost a more of a conduit for distance, but empathy seems almost like the opposite to me, sort of a form of closeness. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. I never wanted to distance myself from the reader. Me not speaking in the I wasn't a way to distance myself. But it was more to say like, and when I speak about my experiences, so often I get hit with questions that are so feel very strange. Like, well, how did this happen? Or like, I'm just like, you know, I so I still think we're so behind as a culture in how to discuss things like that. So I saw a lot of value in turning it around and saying, like, what if it was you? It's not just me; it's also you. Um,
Hmm.
and because I'm not doing, for me, it feels like closing the distance, because what hurts me hurts you, and what hurts you hurts me. I think that we've really lost that as a culture.
Yeah, can you talk to me a little bit more about the role that activism plays in either your life or your practice?
Sure. I try not to tend towards a lot of political discourse just because things are always changing. Um, I don't want to speak on something I'm not totally informed about. That being said, I have seen the way that a lack of discourse around things like domestic violence really play into things like Roe v. Wade being overturned. When we saw that last summer, I saw a lot of really important conversations about how this was healthcare, and really crucial healthcare, especially to lower income women, diverse women, LGBTQ community. But I never really heard anybody talk about how important it was to keep victims of domestic violence safe. Um, Homicide is the leading cause of death among pregnant women in the US. It's not anything, it's not preeclampsia, it's not, you know, it's homicide. Um, and uh, we are so violence obsessed in this culture. I think we see that with all the discourse around shootings and guns. And, again, I'm not going to touch that because I'm
Hmm.
not informed enough to. Um, but it is all interwoven. And I think the more people you have standing up and saying, like, this is a problem, this is a real issue, and it comes from a lot of things. It's not just mental health, which is certainly a thing. Access to mental health still remains really inadequate, is a nice way of putting it.
Hmm.
It's this obsession with guns. It's this culture of silence and erasure of these stories. And then the constant questioning of victims. It's there's still not the guarantee that you'll be believed or anything will really happen to keep you safe. Restraining orders are a piece of paper. They don't protect you. Um, and so I think in that way, activism plays a role in that it's me screaming into the void, like, can someone please protect us? Can someone please keep us safe? Because this is happening to so many people. Everyone is affected by violence in some way, and if we don't start examining that on any meaningful level, it's just going to continue.
Absolutely. I kept thinking while reading this collection about something that I think about a lot, that I lived in Argentina for several months, and it was kind of right at the start of the Ni Una Menos movement, and just people beginning to say the word feminicide or femicide.
Yep.
That is part of common parlance there. That's like everyone knows that word, they know what it means. And it just sort of, when I first learned it, I was sort of like, why do we never use that word in the United States? Like I had never heard it before in English. I only heard it in Spanish. Um, and I kept thinking again, especially I want to talk a little bit about probability distribution, the poem that weaves facts and sort of statistics about intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. Yeah, I couldn't help but think about the sort of language that we do and don't have for all of the factors at play and why, you know, for example, homicide is the leading cause of death among pregnant women. I don't know if that resonates for you.
Yeah, it does. And it's funny that you mention the language. I hadn't heard the term femicide in years. You bringing it up now, it's just not part of our discourse.
Right.
Um, yeah.
We hear about murders, we hear about homicide, we hear about it as a crime that could be motivated by so many other factors than
Right.
simply hatred of, the woman and femme body.
Sure. And even if they are mentioned, it goes to serve somebody else's cause, or it just goes into like a really heinous true crime podcast, where
Hmm.
it's just the fetishization of suffering and nothing really comes of it anyway. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, let's get into probability distribution, which is the only poem with multiple sections in the collection. And as I mentioned, it sort of engages with research and with facts about these sort of horrifying patterns. So, how does the structure of the collection overall sort of bend around this poem or these fragments to you?
Sure. So I found myself, I mean, understandably so, really anchored in my own experience when I was writing, because that's what I have to write from. And I really wanted to expand it even just for a minute to say, like, this is not something that just happened to me and or is uncommon. And I mean, also personally, it felt like the most intimate poem for me to really um, bring out statistics that are one frightening and two that connected to my own survival story, and then putting in the middle was sort of like a protective thing almost to surround it. It's like my nougaty center. Um, but the structure itself actually came from my weekly poetry group. I originally had it all together as just one long poem, and they were just broken up into stanzas. And Matt and Kira were both like, well, why don't you look at breaking them up on each page so the reader
Mm,
has time to sit with it and really process it. And the moment they said that, I was like, perfect. This poem cannot be in any other form. And I also think that that breaking from the way that I write the rest of the collection helps the reader sit back and go, okay, 1 in 3 people, I can name off 3 women right now, and then statistically one of them has experienced this. Okay, um, and then the idea came from I really a research based writer. I love doing research, and I kept finding all these really alarming statistics, a lot of which I had never read before. And I thought, well, what if I respond to some of these that either feel extremely alarming or and also connect with what I went through. And from it, I got the overwhelming feeling that I shouldn't even be alive after everything that happened. I don't know how I made it out, and I did. And then that's really what I wanted to leave the reader with for the rest of the collection, especially as we end on a more hopeful note with Eviction Notice.
yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah, Eviction Notice gives us this sort of gleam of hope. And, especially after beginning with the intention of what the speaker is trying to do, to forgive, to heal, or, if not forgive, then express, essentially. So, did you, when you wrote it, know that that was going to be the ending poem, or did you sort of write it with the intention of, against all odds, I did make it out, and the collection needs that in it. It needs, that sort of look to the future.
Yeah, it was both. It was both. I knew when I started writing it that that's how I was going to end, and um, as easy as it could have been to just end on a really despairing note and just be like, and everything sucked, and then it's done. Um, that's also not how my journey ended, and it's still very much in the process. But I wanted to remind people that even after all of this, it doesn't define this person. It doesn't define you if this is something that you've lived through, and that there are other things on the other side. Just because um, trauma irrevocably changes you in a lot of ways, and that's its own grieving process. And I think if you're able to reach out to a community and forgive yourself, I mean, that's really what forgiveness through the end of the collection is me reconciling with, as well as forgiving myself for, not leaving sooner or the things that I was feeling. And it was also a reminder to me that said, this is not my life anymore. This is, I came out on the other side, and moving forward, I don't know if my writing will ever really be happy. I think happy poetry is for suckers, but um, not really. But it felt, it also didn't feel constructive for me to not end on a hopeful note, because there is a way out, and there's a way to heal, and there's a way that as a society that we move past our tendencies towards violence um, and exploitation.
Absolutely. So we end here at Author's Corner through the interlude with the same question for all our authors, which is to tell us a little bit about your publication process and the experience of working with a small press.
Sure. So my publication process is a microcosm of how chaotic I am as a person. So
I
um,
feel that.
yeah, yeah. So I found Akinoga through the Poets and Writers online database for small presses. And it's alphabetically towards the top. I was like, great, this is in Baltimore. I'm in Baltimore. I'll just, give them a follow. This is back in like 2019. So I first connected with Michael on Instagram, and then I just sort of followed what the press was doing. I followed some of the writers that they had on their roster. And that October, Michael opened the press up for proposals, which is great because I had about 4 or 5 poems done, and I did not have anything else. So I was like, I can write a proposal. I was a technical writer at the time. I do this for work, so I can, bang this out. But if he asks for a sample, if I move past it, I have just enough where I can show him that I'm writing. So I wrote the proposal, I think either the day before or the day it was due, and submitted it. It was sort of a why not. He liked it. He asked for samples. I was like, I got you. I have these 5. Please don't ask for more. I don't have them. And then I found out, I still remember the date, February 24th, 2020. I got the email that he wanted to publish my book. And so from there, we remember 2020, right? Yeah. So,
Unfortunately.
yeah. So not a lot of writing got done that year. But Michael was incredibly patient through the process. We had a lot of editorial meetings. I was recently cleaning out my email box, and we had chains of emails that were like 80 in a row, just talking through things. He was always really easy to reach. And I think trust is a really important aspect of publishing, especially in your first book. I'd never, when I got this book thing, I'd never even published in a magazine or a journal. So this is really just like, I'm going to do a book now. Great. But having that trust with him that he was going to handle my work gently and respectfully and help me tell it in the best way possible, which was such a relief, especially during COVID, where frankly none of us felt like writing anything. There was no inspiration, and he was very understanding about that. And um, my deadlines were always set by myself, which is terrifying because
Yeah.
that's hard to do. Um, and then also he just gave me so much creative control. Like, hey, Michael, can I do 2 covers? He was like, I've never done it before, but sure. I mean, you get the permission from the authors. I'm like, great. Can we use this font? The font for the book is actually called Lora, the way that I spell my name.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and which is like the another self-insertion, but it was nice to have.
Here, I'll show it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Love.
yeah. But it was nice to have that creative control and belief. And Michael is so supportive of all of his writers. He really believes in us and believes that we should be given the space to tell our stories in the way that we want them to, in the way that rings truest for us. So, um, I will always work with Michael again if he wants to. I really value working with a small press. Obviously, I wouldn't turn down like a big press contract, but I think that small presses are, they're changing the game in the best way. I think we're getting more honest, authentic writing out of it.
It's amazing. So wonderful to hear. So in our remaining 60 seconds, do you have any plugs, anything coming up?
Oh, no, not really. I'm a sort of chaotic person, so I don't like to book out ahead of time. I just sort of I
Yeah.
find things that are a week away and I do them. You can follow me on Instagram, and I think I still have a Twitter. I never post on it. Follow me on Instagram. I will send you my website link when it is up. I am still in the process of doing that. But yeah, you can follow me there. I'm most responsive on Instagram, and I love talking to people. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us today,
thank you.
Laura. Everyone go out and get an essential melancholy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lena.
Thanks for joining us in the Author's Corner. For more conversations with DC area authors and to stay updated about the latest from small independent presses, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook at The Inner Loop DC and on Twitter and Instagram at The Inner Loop Lit.